Hi, this is Pat Moorhead with More Insights and Strategy, and I am here with my co-host, Daniel Newman of IBM Research, and we are here for an exciting episode of a 6-5 Live Insider podcast. And if you're not familiar with those, we interview and talk to the most influential people in the technology industry. Daniel Newman, how are you?
Hey, good morning, Pat. Always excited to have these kinds of conversations. And this is going to be a good one. This is a guest that we've had before, but on a completely different topic. So, we're going to be talking a little bit about AI ethics. We're going to be talking a little bit about advertising. And, you and I as tech guys, we cover a really wide swath. But this is a topic I'm really excited and interested for. And I know we got to bring him on the show, but Pat, why don't you do all the have-to-dos?
Sure. Just a reminder, we do talk about public companies, but please don't take any of this as investment advice because this show is for informational and educational purposes only. Typically, the 6-5 stands for 6 topics, 5 minutes each. Sometimes go a little bit longer. It's not about news. This is about the meaning and the importance of technology. But without further ado, let's introduce our guest, Bob Lord, Senior Vice President at IBM Worldwide Ecosystems. Bob, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you guys for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun the first time. I know we hit you up at the very end to do another one, and look at this. Here we are. But why don't we jump right in? And Bob, let's talk about what you do for IBM, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the topic at hand.
Yeah, so guys, I have 2 roles. And last time we talked mostly about the ecosystem and the work we're doing with Call for Code, and the great work we're doing there around partners and the open ecosystem. I also have another hat in the company, and it's to oversee the weather company and the Watson advertising business, which is in the media and marketing landscape. For those of you who click on your iPhone or you try to get weather every day, we're fueling all that information that you get underneath that. So it's actually a really, really exciting business. And we're going through a major transformation right now about how you actually attract audiences and what you do with audiences. And that's the topic that we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, it's a great question, Bob, and a great topic. It's something that we're pretty excited about. We had a chance to talk to you in the background a little bit about what's going on here. And, I wanted to kind of start out with you talking about the overall advertising space, IBM Watson, the inherent bias that exists. These are all things that are sort of, coming more and more into attention. And I was kind of wondering if you could kind of give us a brief background. Why did this become an issue with the acquisition, with your role in the weather company? How frequently is this showing up, and what's kind of IBM doing right now?
So I think what's actually really interesting right now in the media and marketing landscape is people are not using AI at scale yet, and they haven't really embraced it at the level that I think they need to. Now, I've been here at IBM for 6 years, and I've seen AI transform countless industries, whether it's from financial services to healthcare to cybersecurity to insurance. And what it is it's using basic AI, machine learning, and basic AI principles to provide insight to business owners so that they can make better decisions. And we can come back and talk about that. But think about what's happening right now in how there's lots of controversy around identifying and engaging audiences within the marketing and media landscape. You hear about it every day, about whether people want to be, tracked, which they don't want to be. I believe actually what AI allows is real-time optimization and a better value exchange between a brand and a consumer than we've ever been able to see before. But that's going to mean that the media marketing landscape is going to have to embrace AI. The secondary benefit, and Daniel, you were talking about this, is I truly believe that if we apply AI principles appropriately, we can actually root out the inherent biases that exist in the marketing landscape today. And quite honestly, have been in the industry for decades. And we all grew up on segmentation, pricing, promotion. All inherited in that is bias. And we believe, and I have seen, at least for the initial research we've done, that we can actually root out biases and make our advertising much more appropriate to our consumers than ever before.
Yeah, so Bob, we talked a little bit about, I think we've established that it's an issue, but I think the next question is what is being done about it in the industry?
Well, I think Patrick, that's really the challenge right now. Okay. I think we have an opportunity. You all have heard about some of the rumors around taking away cookies, which is really the primary way that people kind of advertise. They look backwards and they look at people's behaviors in the past, and then they actually target that individual, obviously permission-based, based on past behavior. We're going to move to the era where those cookies are going to go away, right? Some of the largest players in the industry have said that they're going to eliminate those things. So what does that mean? How do we actually create a value exchange between a brand and a consumer? The way that you can do that is you can do real-time optimization based on, obviously, again, permission-based, but real-time optimization at the moment in time, not only understanding where they are at that time, but also optimization on creative placement. And where we've been able to do that, we actually see a better conversion because you're much more relevant to the consumer and what their needs are at that moment in time versus what we used to do in the past. And then therefore this is the opportunity. Now, the second piece to that, because we know we start out with a gross segmentation. It's already biased based on the fact that we've started with that segmentation and the cohort groups. But you can actually optimize against the AI to root out the biases that are coming through, similar to what we've done, let's say, in the insurance industry, where we root out biases around underwriting for approvals for insurance rates, or in the financial services area, we root out biases around mortgage approvals. You can do the same thing, and the AI can help the decision maker identify that maybe they're only advertising to a certain community, and that they should be advertising to a broader community.
So let me ask you a question. I want to follow up on that one a little bit. Why start with advertising? Because you mentioned a bunch of different examples, and so this is an area you guys are really zeroing in on, and it seems really interesting. But there's so many areas coming out here. What sort of drove you to come out hot and heavy around advertising?
Well, look, I think it's the opportunity right now, Daniel, that we're going to rebase how we do marketing, because as cookies go away and digital tracking goes away and is mandated, we have the opportunity to do advertising bias-free in the future. But that means we have to basically build that into the processes that we all love and cherish today as marketers, okay? We know that segmentation leads to cohort groups. We know that if we do segmentation properly, we're going to get a very high return on our click-through rates, let's say, or our conversions, right? But those conversions ultimately optimize and they sub-optimize among every over and over again. So if I put out a hypothesis, right? Its bias exists in advertising today, and we can use AI to identify it and attempt to mitigate it. So it's ripe right now with the changes that are happening in the advertising industry to build these processes into it as we move forward into the future. And that's why we're laser focused on this right now.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to point that out because as you were giving examples, I'm thinking, this is definitely something that people care a lot about, but all these are things that people care about in every one of these different industries, financial and healthcare, and different ways that you could be applying this. And I'm guessing you guys are working on all this, which kind of drums me up to the next question, which is about research and partnerships. So, you guys have been doing a lot of research. You've been collecting data. This didn't come out of nowhere. You've been delivering and coming into market with new partnerships. Talk a little bit about the research that sort of fueled this effort behind, putting bias and removing it and removing bias in advertising, and then some of the partnerships that you've established to sort of help move this along quicker.
Yeah. So look, I think what I've learned at IBM is a scientific method, right? It came back to me as I got older here, but I learned it in college and it comes back here. But you always start out with a hypothesis and then you do research around it. So last year we engaged IBM Research with a colleague of mine, Dario Gill, who is the Senior Vice President and Director of Research here at IBM. It's one of the storied organizations. It's probably one of the most fascinating organizations, I think, in the world. But now we have over 20 plus people engaged in this work, including our best PhDs, researchers who authored on and published on multiple AI topics around this, and specifically around bias. So they've done it for other industries, and now I'm just pointing them towards advertising. And we've prioritized that the team be very diverse in terms of demographics and experience, because that's part of the problem we're trying to get at also, right? You don't want the researchers to be biased even before we start the research itself. So we have ad tech engineers, we have advertising strategists, we have data scientists, we have AI specialists, and then we have shareholders across the ecosystem. So one of the partners we brought in was the Ad Council, right? Everyone knows the Ad Council. They probably do the best job at really trying to get advertising more ubiquitous and bias-free than anyone else. And we've taken their data set. We've leveraged some of our open source tools, and we've taken their data set to see if their advertising in this last campaign has been biased. And guess what? It's biased. Because you start out with a particular segment and you refine around that segment. We did a program with them. It's Up to Your COVID vaccine campaign. It was educating people around the campaign. And what happened was the tools that we currently have today, when they started out with a very large universe, based on the criteria that they put about how they wanted to contact people, they sub-optimized themselves and they never rooted out that bias. So they ended up advertising to a particular cohort group because they were getting a better conversion there. When in actuality, there's other cohort groups that really needed to be educated and they needed to target against those cohort groups. So it's unintentional bias. If we build our tools in to those programs, you're going to be able to highlight those things going forward. Now, where are we in the stage is your other question. We're just doing the research, right? I am asking advertisers to give me a look into their campaigns, have them come forward so we can look at IBM's open source tools and see where the biases exist. That'll give us an indication of what kind of tool sets we need to build into our targeting process as we go forward. And IBM, I'm not going to come out with a tool that everyone's going to use. This is going to be a tool that can be used across the industry and built in to a lot of the targeting tools that are out there today. We're starting to talk to, the likes of our partners with Adobe, with Magnus. We're starting to talk to some of the agencies about how they could use these tools going forward. And there's been a great reception around it so far.
So Bob, IBM is one of the few companies left that actually does real research. And I've always been a proponent. I really try to educate people that R&D is not the same thing. They're two very different things. Development is really about productizing some of the research that has been done, and research is real research. You're not too sure if you'll ever get to monetize anything, and a lot of times it's done for the greater good. And IBM has a great multi-decade track record for doing this. We were fortunate enough to talk with Dario Gil at the 6.5 Summit 2021, and he went through a lot of his team's capabilities. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you: is there any specific areas inside of IBM Research that your project and initiatives with bias and advertising are taking advantage of? Whether it's AI, whether it's code that actually creates other code. Is it quantum? What types of things is it leveraging?
Yeah, okay. So there's a couple of pieces. So even just let's stay on the bias topic for a minute, and I'll talk to you a little bit about quantum because there's so much going on there. So the great news about Dario's organization is we are one of the largest players in the AI space, and he's been doing a lot of research for decades around AI. He and the organization really have created this ethical and trusted approach across how to employ these technologies. And actually 2 years ago at Davos, we launched the IBM Policy Lab. It's basically a global forum to foster trust and innovation around AI. What we found, and the insight that they found, was people weren't taking on AI because they didn't trust it. And what it really got down to was they didn't understand it, right? They didn't understand how the decisions were being made. And what Dario and the team did is almost took the black box and opened it up.
Oh, interesting.
So that people could actually see how the decisions were being made. And now adoption has started to go forward. You can't, from a standpoint, we cannot let the machines just make the decisions. We have to be informed with the decisions and then decide whether or not those decisions should go forward. So the whole thrust of what he's been able to do is trustworthy AI, which I think is really, really an important piece, which now I'm leveraging in the advertising business. So I'm particularly working with those people. So all the research that they've done over those years, I'm morphing it and say, let's just point it towards advertising and see what kind of result we can get there. And that I believe is sort of the credibility that I can bring into the marketing and media landscape based on what they've done before. Are we leveraging quantum in this project? Not yet. I mean, if you think about quantum, quantum is going to be a complement to classical computing. Classical computing's being ones and zeros, on and off, on and off, on and off. It's going to actually give us much more compute power than ever before to have us solve real problems. Now, what I could see happen here is one of the big things that this could help us with, or quantum can help us with, is the amount of data that we have to crunch, right? Because classical computing can only do so much data crunching from an algorithmic standpoint. If we need to, if the data set gets big enough and we need to really crunch, we can actually then access quantum simulation and quantum computing to get some insight into that. But it's still yet to be determined.
Bob, a lot of this conversation reminds me of the same types of conversations we had about mortgage banking, credit cards, and making sure that we reduce bias on things like that. And the conversation of how to get inside the black box, really, even in the finance industry, made deep learning an issue, because you essentially can't audit deep learning. Now, researchers are finding a way to do this, so they really came in and they focused in on machine learning instead, which is a lot more auditable, but fascinating stuff.
It's what's so interesting is when you open up the black box, it's about how the decisions are being made, and are you in alignment? Is your business in alignment? You're the decision maker with those decisions that are being made, and then you can actually lever those decisions and make them more institutional. And I think that's really the balance that you have to have around being responsible in this world of artificial intelligence and decision making.
So Bob, I want to circle back here. You guys are obviously making progress. You've driven this into some really great partnerships. If you're successful in being able to remove bias from advertising, what do you think are some of the broader benefits? Obviously, what Pat just mentioned, what he suggested with being able to get the right mortgage to the right person, putting the right ad. How does this scale? Do you see this applying into other AI-driven challenges and ethics around the world?
Well, yeah. So let's just take that question and piece it apart. I mean, the overall goal right now, I don't have a specific tool, right, to offer the industry, right? We're still sort of in that research gathering place. I hope by the middle of the year, towards the end of 22, we're going to have some tools that we want to share with people. But the goal right now, our overall goal is to minimize the impact of bias on consumers, on brands, campaigns. Kind of very focused, very simplistic, right? While establishing new practices around campaign performance. Because if we don't insert ourselves into that campaign performance, the sub-optimization will continue to happen. So we have to have a check and balance about how the campaigns actually, call them the flights, the media plans, whatever people call them, right? We have to insert ourselves there so that we have these flags that come up. The outcomes, is, I hope, a scalable approach to bias identification and mitigation. That's the first thing. If I can have a scaled approach that's open source that everyone can take, I feel like we have a really good chance of creating an industry playbook for fairness in ad tech. And I believe the ad tech players will come forward and embrace these kind of solutions. It'd actually be another piece would just be to educate the industry and the marketing organizations, that the legacy of pricing, promotion, segmentation, the old processes have got to be changed, and bias detection has to be right in the center of it. Not only for the good of the world, right, and gets everyone else, but I believe that it is actually a better business value proposition. I think we're not advertising to consumer groups that need to be advertised to, which opens up a really good economic equation for the brands. And then sometimes we're sub-optimizing and making it worse for consumer groups, like, in like I think they call it like the food desert, right? So let's say you have a CSR company or the fast food company, and they're advertising. Well, you know what? Their advertising is much more effective in an underprivileged minority or place, because that's all the food that exists is fast food. They don't have any options. So therefore, you continue to advertise in that area when actually in other areas, they have a bigger portfolio and higher demographics, and they probably could get a better return on their money. So those are the kinds of things. It's one or the other, but you've got to, I believe that we I think educating people around this bias problem and how we can root it out is part of the objective I've got right now.
Bob, I know we're early in this and you're putting together the research. You did talk about starting off with a hypothesis, and I do appreciate your going back to the university days. I mean, it's even what I do 32 years later. But any types of metrics that say advertising could be 2x more effective, 20% more effective. I mean, listen, 10% more effective is amazing to begin with, but are we talking about order of magnitudes here?
Yeah.
Or
Look, real-time AI, the experiments that I have done with brands on the weather company property, we've seen 25 to 30% better effective rate. I mean, it's kind of amazing because now think about it, it's real-time dollars. Right, so you have $1 to spend. Instead of it tracking in the past and guessing where someone's going to be, I'm optimizing Bob Lord and what he's doing at that moment, at that time, and I get a really great return on my dollar. Now, I've got to be much more sophisticated about how I do that real-time optimization, but that's what we're talking about. And I think we're just scratching the surface of this. And all I can ask people though. Let me just ask my agency colleagues and my brand colleagues. I'd love to ask them to donate their data on a campaign that I could run through the IBM Research tool set, because the more information, Patrick, I have to actually understand what the nuances are and all of the cohort groups and the proxy characteristics. We're finding there's like 250 proxy characteristics underneath segmentation that are influencing how the machine works. Like I have to understand what those proxy characteristics are so that I can actually build tools to mitigate those proxy characteristics, if that makes sense, across the segmentation. Yeah. So the more data I have, the more I can actually build the tool sets to root it out.
That's really interesting, Bob. And I just want to ask one last small question here. It feels like with this technology, this should be somewhat easy to apply for companies. This isn't going to be hard once you guys have done the hard work.
Yeah, Daniel, I think you're right. And I think the offer is utilize the tool set, insert it into your processes. It is not going to be a heavy lift. If anything, it's just going to be another indicator of whether or not what you're pushing out into the community has a bias to it or not. And if it has a bias, this is the suggestions that you have to correct it. So it is it's there. It's known technology. And that's actually why I'm so excited. Like I said at the beginning, we have this moment in time right now where the advertising and media landscape is going through a major change around identification. We have the opportunity to build AI right into the center of how we do marketing and media going forward in the future in an open source world. And I'm really, really excited about the opportunity.
Yeah, Bob, it's been great. And it's been great having this conversation with you. I hope people are taking note, that they're listening, they're paying attention. The opportunity is significant. And by the way, it's an area that I don't know that IBM gets a lot of credit for, but I hope that this is one of the opportunities that it does, that you're out there talking on stage at CES at a big event that sometimes enterprise tech companies aren't necessarily thought of in being involved. And you're telling a story, something that, by the way, impacts so much of the world's population in a really meaningful and material way. So Bob Lord, SVP Worldwide Ecosystems, IBM, thanks again for joining us on another 6.5 Insider Edition. We love having you, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you again on our show soon.
Great. Thanks for having me again, guys. Appreciate it.
Great stuff. It is truly incredible, the value that IBM Research brings to the table. And what I think is so cool is the alignment between Bob and his group and the Weather Channel, and how that morphed into doing essentially better advertising that's better for the advertisers and better for the consumer as well, because it's reducing bias.
Yeah, and here's a funny thing, Pat, is when you're watching commercials now, you notice there's a lot of attention to detail, more quality, more diversity, more thought in how people are positioning various commercials to make sure that we are being considerate of the world and the current state. However, I think some of it's being done scientifically, and I think some of it's being done qualitatively. And so what I'm hearing here is the opportunity for us to get away from some of that subjective, qualitative attention to those, the issues and societal issues, and really look at what the data is saying and let technology help. Because with all the data that's out there, we know one thing for sure, Pat. You and I know in every business, every industry that we analyze and advise is that the tech can do do it better at scale than any of us ourselves. So it was a great conversation with Bob. And, like I said, it's always fun to have him on. Last time we talked to him about something completely different. And he's kind of like us. He's a utility player. Great, great executive.
Bob's an east to west guy like us. That's fun.
Absolutely, Pat. So without further ado, I want to say thanks to everybody for tuning into this episode of the 6.5 Podcast Insider Edition. We love having our guests. We love bringing all these public companies. Thanks, IBM, for your support and for giving us the chance to talk to Bob after what I thought was a great CES presentation. We'll hope to have him soon. Hit that subscribe button. Join us for more podcasts, of course, our weekly edition, and then many insider editions where we have many fascinating executives join our show. But for this edition, Pat, I think it's time that we wave our hands. We say goodbye until we see you next time.
Take care.